welcome to Show Studio. We're getting sort of towards the middle of Paris Fashion Week, but it's such an exciting show to be talking about because it's Hussein Chalayan, or Chalayan as I should say, and we're going to be unpicking everything that Hussein is doing at the moment, but also talking a little bit about his archive, the way he's worked in the past and some of the different mediums he's used, because we have a fantastic fashion filmmaker with me. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves in a second, but I do want to say that we're joined by a wonderful set of students from Central St Martin's, which is really exciting because obviously that's where Hussein studied, so it's a very nice set of people in the studio today. Before we start our dissection and discussion, I'll let my wonderful panel introduce themselves, starting with you, Kathryn.
Okay, my name's Kathryn Ferguson and I am a filmmaker and a curator.
I'm Dal Chodha and I'm a fashion writer.
I'm Belle Jacobs, I'm a freelance fashion writer.
I'm Lucy Moore and I'm director of Claire de Rouen Books.
As I kind of inferred before we began, I'd really like to talk a little bit about how Hussein has operated as a designer sort of over his career, because he's got an incredibly sort of diverse repertoire. And Dal, I'm going to go to you first because you just edited Archivist and they've done an amazing sort of unpicking of everything that Hussein's done.
Yeah.
It's absolutely incredible. Tell me a bit about looking through that archive and what that sort of brought out for you.
Yeah, well, Archivist was set up in 2012 by Jane Howard and Michael Harrison, and the idea of Archivist is, rather than kind of looking at things in a very almost quite romantic, historical way, it's about reviving these forgotten things. And I think when we talk about particularly Hussein in the current issue, which is a Hussein Chalayan special, we always think of 2000, the table, or we always think of these iconic moments. I think everyone still has in their heads these really powerful visuals of things that Hussein has contributed to popular culture. Well, maybe not popular culture, but culture in general. And so the kind of brief that Jane set for herself when shooting his work was to kind of shoot those unrecognizable pieces, those pieces that are removed from that performance that he's so kind of heavily associated with. So it was quite interesting for Jane and Axel, the photographer, Axel Holt, going through his archive, finding those pieces that actually maybe we've all missed and have never ever looked at. So what you see on the cover is Kristen McMenemy wearing just a really beautiful dress, and that's something that I think Hussein has unfairly never been credited for, because we never really think about beautiful dresses from Hussein on a retail level in particular, but just generally, if you talk about Hussein, you talk about the theatre and the performance and the technology and all that innovation, and I think sometimes people forget that he does just make really beautiful clothes. So the magazine's the issue's vision was to really kind of celebrate his just great ready-to-wear pieces.
I think it's a really good point what you make there about the wearability thing, because there's a wonderful quote in Susanna Frankel's Visionaires where she talks about him, and she says that kind of the amount of sort of the striking things that he did in the performative element almost undermined that wearability, because the quote, she says, like, it's not new that the British are famously suspicious of everything that even remotely approaches the conceptual in fashion. They're very much of the idea that a dress is a dress. And I think because Hussein has done things like the table skirt, the aeroplane dress, it has sort of eclipsed some of the incredibly beautiful wearable pieces he's done. But do you like Hussein as a wearable designer? Is that how you think of him, or do you think this idea of him as a conceptual designer always comes sort of back in?
I think in one perspective it does get in the way, because like you say, that's what you remember. On another level, hasn't it actually raised him into the public eye more, that you do see him more because of the amazing stuff? Looking through his old stuff in preparation for this talk, phenomenal amount of really wearable, really beautiful stuff that people don't talk about enough. So amazing respect for him.
It's difficult because you say that it sort of elevated him into the public consciousness, which I think is particularly true, but he has really struggled to establish sort of a commercial footing, I think, because of that idea that perhaps he hates the tag conceptual designer, but he's so sort of artistic and multifaceted in how he works, which I guess is really hard, isn't it? It's that creativity, commerciality thing that we always talk about.
But it's so integral to who he is, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you can't really remove it. I mean, I'm trying to think of a Chalayan without the aeroplane dress, and I can't really think of that. I mean, he is a whole thing. He's an artist who works with clothing, which is what he says.
And for lots of designers, and him in particular, he's got to do that to get to the wearable dress at the end.
Sure.
And I guess the difficulty is that so many people from any level see, what you see on the rail in a Halley and Liberties, for example, is so far removed from the concept quite often that maybe with Hussein's clothes, it can kind of drown out those clothes, and that's the kind of difficult line, I guess, that he's always had to tread.
Yeah, but that is true. There is a continuity of practice between the really, really flamboyant items and, I mean, those ones, the more wearable pieces probably wouldn't have existed without that starting point.
I think that's a good point. Even if you look at some of the prints he employs, he's very interested in this idea of migration and travel and sort of cultural identities, which is really obvious in some of the sort of big films he's done, but also just in the prints that he's done that kind of reflects that idea of culture. So I think I really agree with you there. But I do want to talk about this process of, I guess putting it simply, research through to sort of final product, because that's something that you can really sort of share with us, Lucy, this idea of how designers reference and work, because obviously working at Claire de Lune, it's a resource that so many designers use to come in and look. And do you think the best designers are always those that have the draw not from fashion, but from, as Hussein does, art, history, architecture, philosophy? It's kind of a simplistic question. Do you have to be a good designer to reference?
I don't think so. I don't think it's either or. And I was thinking about this morning, and there are lots of designers that come into the shop and buy books for research, but Hussein hasn't. But the thing that's really prominent in terms of my thinking about him is this incredible book that he made with Rizzoli just for his show in Paris, a retrospective show in 2011, and the book is very, it's full. It's kind of rich with both the highly conceptual works and also the sort of thing that you were both talking about, that these, I think, pieces that maybe get forgotten. But the thing that's really striking about it is that it's not a regular rectangle. It's got a sort of slanted shape and like almost a parallelogram. I mean, it's not that extreme, but to make a book like that is very, it's expensive, it's kind of time consuming, it requires a lot of the book designer. It's so beautiful, and I was speaking with the editor, Robert Vionnet, about how that came about, and he was describing how when you open the book it sort of hugs you because of its shape, and I found that really interesting, that even making a book for Hussein there's a similar kind of thinking around the body and your relationship with kind of external objects and I guess domestic objects like a table, a book, and I just that's a kind of hallmark of his practice. I get it's like this very unusual approach to making anything, making a book.
It's interesting to think about that, because obviously there's been such a huge sort of celebration and sort of rise in fashion publishing and the number of fashion books we see, and so many designers now do a book, but do you feel that often they're not as considered as they could be? They don't tie into the designer's thought process enough? I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but you see so many kind of retrospectives of a designer, it doesn't feel like it was them, and it's interesting to hear you talk with such passion about that book, because it feels like it was very Hussein.
Yeah.
There are definitely some designers who are conspicuous in their absence from the shelves, and they have some respect in my mind, because it seems okay, they're making the clothes. I don't. I think again it's a kind of it's hard to generalize, but and it's always nice if there are beautiful books being published. It's nice for me, but I think to an extent it's hard to make. I think it's hard to make books about clothes. They don't lend themselves to a small, two-dimensional surface. They're all about the body, really. And actually, going back to the original, to what Dal, you were talking about. I think ritual is like a very key part of what he does, and there's something nice about how clothes, which maybe of his, which aren't kind of always thought about, but yet you might have and put on fairly often, like they're very wearable, and they lend a kind of, there's a modesty to those, to the sort of ritual of wearing a dress that might not be a huge attention grabber, but acquires memories through repeated wear. And so in that sense, I think that aspect of his work kind of conforms to the general theme, this ritual as a kind of more constant theme in what he does. So
It's interesting how you talked about, books not being the best way to show clothes, because this leads us very nicely to talk about fashion film, which is obviously a sort of something that's very dear to you, Kathryn, because you're a fashion filmmaker, and something that Hussein's really, really championed. Talk to me a little bit about his use of fashion film. Has it always been someone who's really inspired you? Because we were talking before about afterwards, and you were saying that you found that a particularly striking show of his.
Yeah, no, I was, preparing for this, I went back through the archive of film and was looking at the fashion show from, I think, 2001, the Afterwards show, and just couldn't get over how strong his use of narrative and the multi-layered use of narrative actually was, and how it became this like multi-sensory experience from the choir to the fact it was set in Sadler's Wells to actually having such a strong sort of set. Everything just lent itself so well to film, and whilst it was actually filmed and the show itself was filmed, I just really think that he could actually take that and create narrative fashion films really in a fantastic way, like using his own heritage and his own interest in his heritage and the whole sense of migration into an actual narrative piece. He could really take it to the next level.
Do you like narrative in fashion film? Because I know some fashion filmmakers really don't think that we should have kind of a narrative.
Yeah, I do. I do. I'm very open to. I'm very open to just fashion films that really create some sort of emotional response in me, whether it's through all-out spectacle and beauty or something that's actually trying to tell a story. I'm very open to just being, just open to fashion film and what can happen next, really. But I really like the idea of using heritage and identity within fashion film and seeing where that goes a bit further. And I think he could, I think whilst he's touched on it, I think that could really be something they could do a lot more in the future.
Where do the rest of you stand on fashion film, and what do you see as the future for fashion film, especially given that we hear a lot of conversation about, the decline of the runway show, the runways can't continue. What's going to happen to fashion film? Is it going to replace the catwalk? Dal, you're kind of looking nervous, so I'm going to go to you.
I am, yeah. I think I think fashion film, there's too many bad examples of that word, that term, that knock about. And I think, fashion film in that stereotypical sense is normally, I don't know why, but it's of a model running down the street looking very harried and stressed and kind of rubbing herself up against a wall in a car park, and it's kind of, that's what people think fashion film is. And the issue I have with fashion film is this whole wave of a lot of the reason we have that is because you get lots of still photographers thinking that they can make films. I'm sure Kathryn can concur. And what they're creating is moving photographs, and that's very different, I feel, to a fashion film. So I think the issue is that lots of designers and brands feel like it's something that they have to do. And they really treat it as something that they have to do rather than something that they should do, if that makes sense. Or want to do, or feel like it adds something new to the collection. I think there are so many designers doing runway shows now that probably should spend that budget on a really fantastic film or a catwalk show. Just kind of pump that money into something that...
It's that social media mentality, we have to be on every channel, we have to be doing everything, isn't it? Yeah, it's quite...
So fashion film as a term, I think is a difficult one, but I definitely think that there's a lot of space. There are lots of great websites out there dedicated to fashion film, Show Studio being one of them, and I think it's important that there are that designers are using that platform in a better way than they are right now.
Can I just quickly butt in? I was going to say, for me, because I work with the British Council, and we've been doing this fashion film programme across the world for the last 2 years, and a lot with Marie Schiller from Show Studio. And where it's become really interesting is seeing how designers outside of the fashion capitals are using film as a way of getting themselves on this global platform, and without having to travel or the huge expenses of trying to squeeze into these shows. They're actually really being very savvy about it, and that's where I think fashion film is getting exciting, because it's starting to level out the playing field a little bit for these designers. in as far away as Jakarta or Nigeria, and you know, a lot of these designers have actually requested that we come over with the British Council to show them how to do it, so they're very alert to the fact that it could actually be something very positive for them.
So they see it as a way to getting their voice and their message out there.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
There is a huge variety of product out there in terms of fashion film, isn't there? There's the really disastrous ones where you get the models. Sorry.
Such a good description.
I can't get it out of my head. But you also have incredibly sophisticated product, which is thrilling. And I've seen, you know, films with Marisa Tomei. I don't know if you've ever seen, but it was actually a narrative, and it was 3 minutes long. It was really gripping and funny and witty. And then you get things like from Prada, which are a bit more like music videos with 5 or 6 fantastic.
The Miu Miu Women's Tales, which I just watched again and again
and
again.
And the
really
films
good.
with Wes Anderson, that Candy thing was so cute.
And then you get the younger designers who come up with really truly creative product. I think there was one filmmaker, David Longshore, did basically look like a puppet show. And you sat there and thought, well, I'm not sure what that's telling me about the clothes, but it's telling me a lot about him and the sensibility that goes behind his brand and therefore his clothes. I think there's a huge amount of potential. It's about wading through the crap to get to the nice stuff sometimes, though. So, you know, the role of Show Studio and Diane Pernet is really important for editing down and showing you what the really great stuff is. There is a lot of rubbish.
And I think it's that issue of sort of authenticity and integrity with it, which is something you touched on, Dal. Like, I think the reason we all love it when Hussein has done it is because it felt like there was a real purpose and a point to it. It felt like it was integral to his thinking. It didn't feel like he'd been like, oh, and I should do a film this season.
Yeah.
Do you think that's missing quite a lot? Do you get asked to do projects where you're like, but why are you doing a film?
Yeah. Yeah, but I do. I mean, I think not to be too hard on it either. I mean, fashion film is really where music video was in the late 70s. It's scrabbling around trying to work out what it is, what it's for. I think a lot of people have wished it would go away in the last few years, but the fact is it's not. And as the internet develops and digital communication for fashion develops online, moving image is essential. So it's about, instead of just slamming it, I think it's very much about trying to work out how to make it better and how to make it more engaging, how to not overly bombard people with it as well, and keep it as a special thing instead of just, you know, just because. And I think the problem is that I think we are getting totally overwhelmed with what we're being shown constantly on the internet all the time. So I think if a designer wants to do a film, it shouldn't be like a constant thing, just because it should actually be really thought through and part of a much bigger strategy for their season or whatever, you know. And I like that Gareth doesn't do them every season, and that when he does, and it's a special event.
Yeah, Gareth.
I think that's a clever way of doing it, really. But
also, I think they could be shown in a newer way, or in different places. I think fashion film, a lot of it lives in a fashion environment on a fashion website. So already you're preaching to the converted in a certain way, because you've got people looking at it that are just hungry for anything fashion. So they'll kind of consume it, and therefore it is treated like junk food, if you like, cultural junk food. But I think if people were more ambitious with where these films were shown, you know, why they don't show fashion films at the beginning of films in a cinema, I don't know. You know, I don't want to sit there necessarily and just watch films for phone companies and things like that. Why no one can slip in a little, you know, film about fashion in there, like a 2-minute thing. I don't know why that doesn't happen anymore, because they are kind of
have to pay for it.
Yeah, it's
but even those big brands that spend a lot of money, you know, they can afford to place that, and I'd much rather see a luxury French fashion house's film in a cinema before I'm watching something else, rather than just look at a picture on a billboard.
But this goes to this. Oh, sorry, Lucy.
I was just going to say, you know, that actually I wonder whether that's almost too overt in terms of, and that maybe what's more powerful, if I think about the relationship between fashion and film that I've experienced, is, you know, feature films where there's a really close relationship with a certain designer, for example. So I have I watched Buñuel's Belle du Jour when I was 21 or something, and I still can picture the Catherine Deneuve's Roger Vivier shoes, you know, climbing a staircase, or the clothes in Vertigo, or or in Blade Runner, you know, this, like, to me is a fashion film, you know, and so there's sort of something, maybe there's almost, there's something quite actually very powerful about a long narrative and these kind of kind of roles that designers play with film directors to really kind of realise some of the psychology of a character or of a place, of a time, and that's quite beautiful.
Well, it's like Her, you know, Spike Jonze's film, you know, I can't remember the name of the costume designer, but Umberto Leon of Kenzo was a consultant on that, and if any of you've seen it, I don't know, it's incredibly powerful on so many different levels, but as a look and that sort of...
That's really powerful.
And the uniform almost that comes with this impossible time in the future.
We're seeing a lot more of that, even these incredibly cliched examples, but like Miuccia Prada with The Great Gatsby and the amount of press that got, and then obviously it's the one that everyone trots out, but Rodarte with Black Swan, you know, a lot more of that kind of fashion uniting with film, but not making a fashion film, and that's quite...
Or like I Am Love with kind of Raf Simons, Jill Sander, that for me is one of those recent, well not recent-ish, but really powerful collaborations, if it weren't that overused word. But yeah, I agree. But I think these films that are being made for a couple of seconds, I think it's a real shame that they are experienced through tinny speakers on a laptop, and I think that's a real frustration for all filmmakers and lots of people who make it. I feel the same about photography, is that it's experienced in such a small, disposable way that actually that's why I'd like to see it in the setting that it should be.
Does this get down to the issue of fashion advertising? Because I guess a forum where that could be done beautifully would be perfume adverts, but then like who's seen a good perfume advert ever? You know, that's such a good way for designers to do an amazing fashion film.
Girls running through houses.
Exactly.
Always running.
Or lying on a bed.
I just wanted
to
lying down.
Running and then lying
and
down.
then the man runs away.
Do you find that frustrating, I guess, because Nick always says, I'm going to put him in the spotlight here, but he always says that he finds it so frustrating with this perfume. He's like, you can literally do anything. He's like, it's a one product where your imagination can run completely wild, and then he was like, and then it's a girl like in a flower field, like having an orgasm, and he's like, why? There's so much.
It's always women having orgasms in perfume ads. I mean, that's kind of the standard. You know, that's the advertising tropes that have been used for decades, and it's really interesting when you look at how the male is represented as opposed to the women in perfume and even fashion film as well, and the women's always submissive and open and sexually available, and the man's always strong and alert and
you could say
arms
that
are
about
gripped.
most fashion shoots where
you
women's
could.
the arch backs and the open mouths.
There's been a lot written about it actually. It's fascinating. It'd be great to see that starting to shift, because it is. I mean, I don't know who it's or what it's selling, and if they're even thinking about the actual consumer base, because I don't see a woman lying on a bed doused in perfume.
Does Hussein have a fragrance? Am I right in thinking he did a fragrance?
Hussein's done a fragrance.
Yeah. How was that?
So.
I feel like he did, and it's not around anymore.
Can we look up it, because I feel like I've just made that up.
No, I
but
feel
I'm
like
pretty
he
sure
did.
he's done a fragrance.
I think it was with Comme des Garçons.
But it'd be interesting to see how he maybe translated or promoted that.
With Hussein, it goes back to what we were saying before we went live, that he's so before his time. Like the films that he's done and the way he presents himself, the installations he's done, it's so sort of innovative, and it's
called Airborne.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was collaborated with
Com,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it still available, or is it just
on eBay.
Snap us up a bottle.
Well, yeah.
No, but I want to just talk a little bit to just take us back to Hussein about the way he has sort of approached these different mediums, because it almost feels like, we were saying this before, and I guess it's a gross oversimplification, but with Hussein you always feel a little bit like he's an unsung hero. Like he's done so much stuff that is incredibly innovative, and sometimes I always think maybe he just did it 2 years too early before anyone got it, and now everyone does it. And there's that frustration with him. You never, like, I know he's won British Design of the Year a couple of times, and he's done some great collaborations, now working with Vionnet on the Demi Couture, so he gets a lot of space, but I always feel a little bit with Hussein like he's not got the attention he deserves.
I feel like that's not, I think partly that's probably because he likes to stay out of the spotlight. But also I think that's the press. I blame a lot of the press, because when they do talk about him, they talk about the stuff we're talking about, but then they won't, I never really see his clothes featured in editorials that much. You never see him at the front of book in a magazine with the Buy This Now. You never really see a beautiful kind of jacket by Hussein pushed as the thing to buy in a weekly glossy. So there's that element that I think he's not been supported by the press. You can win all the accolades that the British Fashion Council want to chuck at you, but they're kind of meaningless if everyone else isn't supporting you in the same level.
Do you think it's because people don't get it? They just think, oh, he's smart, he does
I wonder if his intelligence is a bit alienating for some people, actually.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's the only thing.
And also, I think there's probably loads of
yeah.
other places. For example, there's probably loads of other black dresses that a magazine can feature on its page that will then have knock-on effect to their advertising budgets. And sorry to be cynical about it, but there's probably you know, Hussein almost owns that creative part and I think probably people think, well, that's kind of when we talk about him, we're going to talk about this. Why are we going to just put a black dress of him on there? We can get that from another designer that only does that.
And as you say, he's a very private man. I think he splits his time between Turkey and London. He's flying back and forth. He's not interested in the fanfare and the gimmicks, and I think that probably does have a bit of an impact on.
Yeah, he's very outspoken about not enjoying the celebrity side of it.
He doesn't play that game, and I think now it's sadly a lot about that game more than it ever has been in the current digital age. You've got to be out, you've got to be speaking to the right editors, and
that's the irony with him, is he's such an innovator in terms of digital, but then he seems to have perversely suffered because of the digital, and that's what I mean with that kind of 2 years too early. It's almost like, I sometimes wonder if in like 50 years time we'll all be like, Hussein was right. You know, it's that thing where you feel like he's doing it all, but he's just not doing enough of the stupid stuff that you have to do.
I think also he's so relevant that he's become irrelevant to people that just like fashion, because he's so beyond all of that. What Belle's kind of touching on, his intelligence or his concepts, it's almost too much for a lot of people to deal with. But I still, you know, when I'm doing tutorials with students, I still pull out collections that he's done that literally the students I'm talking to probably only one. 1 year old, and they go and watch a video by him and their mind is totally blown. And that is so incredible that a designer can do that. And also, does he like calling himself a designer? I don't know, but it feels like that's kind of...
He said before he's not a sorry.
Well, I heard he calls himself an artist. And he used to shy away from that term, and then he just sort of went, no, that is what I am, and that's how I think. And so I was just thinking, I watched a bit of his fashion, like 2 minutes of a 20-minute film, and it was, I can't remember the name, it was based on Japan culture. And it was pretty, I mean, just to see it without explanation was a very abstract experience, because there's not a lot going on in it. And then and then I read his explanation of it, and suddenly many things become clear. But you think for someone approaching the video just without knowledge perhaps of him or perhaps the story behind the collection, it was quite you just go, what's going on, kind of thing. And that's what I worry, that a lot of people get distance from him and his intelligence.
But it's interesting with what Dal says about him being so relevant, because I do feel when you understand the explanation, or when he gives the explanation, the things that he deals with, the topics, are actually incredibly relevant. Things like, you know, cultural identity, migration, being an immigrant. It's so sort of central to the way, especially London fashion operates, and they're not lofty or sort of overthought concepts. A lot of it's very based in sort of real life, and I find that very interesting with him. But as you say, it's that issue of his intelligence putting people off, I think. And there's not that kind of, there's no gimmicks with Hussein. It is difficult, and I think sometimes people want a bit of immediacy that you just don't get from him.
Particularly in the culture that we live in, where we expect things to be immediately available to us. To have to work at something, to understand it and read around it and research is quite hard for people who aren't used to doing that.
That's probably the disadvantage of the digital for Hussein, is that sort of thirst for immediate understanding.
I want it to look pretty. I want it to make me feel this. I want to be able to buy it now. Now. It's kind of quite difficult for that.
He is an artist, though, isn't he? I mean, he had a solo show, didn't he, at the Listen Gallery a couple of years ago. I mean, I think that's really it. He isn't a commercial designer, but he inspires so many thousands of young designers coming up under him. Like, he's a thinking designer.
It's tricky though, because it goes back to Dal's point of view. You can throw, like the British Council can throw many accolades. And I think it's that thing where we can say all this wonderful, sort of incredibly lovely things about him, and I think everyone thinks that, but he still needs to make some money and have a living. And I think that's one thing that's so sad with Hussein, is that, you know, I think there's no question that everyone thinks he's incredibly talented, but then it's how does he build a business off being an artist when your art form is clothes, if you can't sell the clothes. It's really tricky. I think that's that really, because you want more designers to be like him, but then you don't want him to sort of go through the ups and downs financially that he's had to go through. So it's really tough, isn't it?
He's a really remarkable man. I don't know how much he agonises about this himself. He's phenomenally confident in the way he thinks. He's not really concerned about what other people think of him. He's very aware. I think, didn't he go into administration at one point in his business, and then he just turned it around? I mean, he's smart in so many ways. He put himself out there, and I think, didn't he commentate one of his own shows to make the clothing more accessible? It's sad that he's not as much recognised. I don't know how much it bothers the man himself, which is phenomenally admirable.
And I guess it's nice just to talk. I really want to have a look at the show, but just talk briefly about what's happening at Vionnet, because I think a lot of people were happy that Hussein had been sort of offered a good outlet for his work. What did we think of that couture collection? Did everyone have a chance to have a look?
I had a very small look. I saw 3 outfits. I mean, I read an interview again in preparation when he was talking about being taken on, and his confidence shows through. I mean, one of the questions was, "Don't you feel intimidated by having to step into Vionnet's shoes?" And he was like, "Well, I'm not trying to pretend to be Vionnet. I'm trying to think about how she would think about things if she was where I am now." The clothes, you know, they weren't there if you want to look spectacular on the red carpet and if you want to show off your tits, and they're not that kind of clothing. I don't know how the demi-couture world would accept them. I just don't know enough about that area, but I'm so pleased he's there.
How about you, Dal? Is that the same thing? You're happy he's there, and just happy that he's been giving that kind of forward
recognition?
Yeah,
I'm slightly. I don't think we need Vionnet around anymore. I'm not a massive fan of this sort of, you know, constant lazy resuscitation of houses and labels that should be allowed to have their doors remain firmly closed. So on that side, no. And also I have another issue with demi-couture. I don't really know kind of what that means. I do know technically what it means, but I don't really know how relevant it feels. So I don't know how relevant it is, and I don't know how. I'd much rather see the Chalayan business on all levels just get that kind of lift, and if a V&A contract is what's needed to do that. But the thing, I don't think money is an issue either, because he's been working with Puma, he's got, there are funds available, and again, it's very crude to talk about that. So I don't think it's from his side. I definitely feel like the fashion industry is not pushing him or celebrating him. And that's the kind of bit that I don't. So of course everyone's going to say, oh great, is it V&A? But I mean, really, how great is it? Because I want to see these clothes on women now.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily want to see another fashion brand try and resuscitate itself with really expensive one-off pieces. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. Should we see what he's done for this season?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's that thing, isn't it, with Hussein, where, you know, we've just been talking about how wearable it is, and you look at it and it's just absolutely beautiful.
Love it.
The pieces. Yeah. Look number 3 is absolutely stunning.
It's interesting kind of thinking about if we'd know that this was Chalayan without obviously sitting here with that knowledge. I don't know how recognisable is a Chalayan ready-to-wear piece.
I think that's the issue that Bell sort of struck on really, really intelligently, that his intelligence kind of sort of prohibits in some ways, because I think the thing is, when you think of the Hussein code, you think of an aeroplane dress or a paper dress or a table skirt, when actually that's not what he's about. So you don't think about what sleeve shape he favours or what skirt length he favours in the way that you would for a normal ready-to-wear designer. So it does make it harder to look at a piece and say, oh, that's Chalayan, just because I don't think people... I actually, frankly, don't think that many people take the time to look at his ready-to-wear collection, because they're just looking at, you know, the table skirt that he's done.
I think that coat was in the pre-form.
Yeah, it was.
The palette's really distinctive. For me, it's that kind of skin tones, neutrals and greys, and I think that is quite. I recognise that often.
That's actually really interesting.
Yeah, there are repeated motifs, aren't there? Like that very long slit up the skirt and the oversized tops, and the quite soft, slopey shoulders, almost sort of 90s. I feel as if I've seen those in previous collections from not so long ago.
Yeah, it is. There is a softness, isn't there? The shoulder, the rounded pocket, the rounded lapel. He's not a sort of...
And so the asymmetry to the hems that he often plays with, there is this kind of, a softness.
It's a beautiful jacket, number 14. So lovely. And
I think very big
shape.
earrings as well. Sorry.
Is she? Oh,
yes.
They're great.
It's quite fabulous.
Jayla's coming back.
And this is all pretty wearable, isn't it?
Yeah.
We say this, there are some amazing looks coming. I think, I can't tell number 17 is an example of it, but he's done dresses in this collection, which are going to strike us in a minute, that are done with false nails embedded into the fabric,
that's
hundreds of
what
false
Lauren was
nails.
I knew it. J-Lo is the reference with the hoop earrings and the false nails. Are they these? Is it
She's
these
still Jenny from
skirts
the block.
here?
Do you know what the
There's
theme
no-
is?
It's
Does he
the
always
collection
have-
is called Through. That's what the collection is called.
Any other information?
No, it's Hussein. Through.
Well, what I love about it, it's like standing in a gallery, isn't it? And
Yeah,
that whole
and
thing
trying
of,
to get it.
is anyone going to give you the notes?
Yeah.
Or you're going to have that headset that's going to say, right, what you are looking
Yeah.
at is, and
Yeah.
he doesn't really do that. And I
No, he
think
doesn't.
I went to the Martin Creed show at the Hayward yesterday, which was appalling, like, in my opinion. But I think actually in this conversation, it brilliantly illustrates what fashion is doing right now. Because a lot of fashion is like that Martin Creed show. It's all very like, ha, here's a top, ha, here's a skirt. And the opposite of that is that you get this, which is kind of professing it has this kind of intellectual starting point that maybe is difficult for a lot of people to engage with, or a lot of people don't want to engage with that stuff.
I also think there is a danger though in over-intellectualising it. Like, you can look at some of these pieces and just think, actually, these are gorgeous, like very relevant, and the shape, that kind of mid-length skirt with a slightly oversized knit or oversized top. There is a danger in always trying to project a sort of
worthiness.
Yeah, exactly.
And that word through makes sense absolutely with these clothes. You know, see-through.
Where's this nail dress?
I know, I want the nail dress. Is it coming? Have we?
Oh,
Okay, we've got close-ups, that's good.
Okay. That's nice.
I love it.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly beautiful. I think the palette is incredibly
Also, what's all really interesting as well about looking at a Hussein Chalayan kind of a slideshow like this, there's that anticipation that we probably all have that, hang on a minute, something's going to happen at the end. And I don't know whether it does this season, does it? Does something happen?
These are the nail pieces coming
okay.
through. Which I love with him is that he takes something incredibly kind of raw and almost ugly and base and makes it into something incredibly... So yeah, these are all false nails.
Wow.
That's amazing.
And kind of really tacky false nails as well. Like the close-ups are like the ones that are covered in patterns, you know, very sort of like Kingsland Road, £4 manicure. But
There is a story.
Yeah.
There will be a story about
You know
why
where to
he's
look.
using them, because
Yeah.
he does have. I just love to know what that is.
Look at that peeling of these dresses.
Which reminds me of that one of the pieces that I really loved with the Vionnet couture was the ones that, you know, that sort of almost the holes, and it was almost like layers of fabric building up and getting more and more see-through. And I think there's this element of peering through something, and it's interesting that this is now through after that, which was very much felt like it was about
He does use sheer fabrics in lots of other collections.
incredibly
as
well,
It's-
doesn't he?
Yeah.
Should we see the close-ups to see?
It's a big collection as well.
Yeah. But I do think it's an incredibly commercial collection. You're right, Dal, when we say like it's such a shame that you think this isn't going to get shot or sort of even just put on trend places. I know he's almost above that, but you want to see that incredible jacket.
I don't think anyone's above that. I mean, come on, you want to sell stuff. It's got that's part of this whole thing. I think there might be a certain snobbery to I don't want to be Grazie or whatever, but come on, that stuff. That's how you make a business.
Well, it's interesting. We had our Balenciaga panel yesterday, and we were talking a little bit about that. The piece that came out in System with Nicolas Casquier, when he talked about one of his real frustrations is that he couldn't, his new ideas, the brand weren't spending enough money or time or energy into commercialising them. And Alex Fury made the point that, you know, if you talk to pretty much 90% of designers, they will say their biggest buzz is seeing an actual person wear their clothes. And I think that's interesting with Hussein. You know, he loves all the concepts, he loves making us think, but he does want to see women in his clothes in the same way that his designer is integral and as intellectual as Nicolas Casquier does. And I think that's the real sort of tragedy with fashion sometimes, where you see brilliant pieces and ideas on the runway, but then they're not being allowed to get to a woman, whether it's via Grazie or whether it's via Balenciaga putting those pieces in the store rather than just focusing on a laureate bag. It's even more beautiful when you see it up close though, just absolutely stunning. But this is what I mean with number 18 that we're seeing. For me, that feels incredibly relevant. You know, everywhere we're seeing that kind of longer skirt with a big slouchy jumper, and for me, you could remove all intellectualization from that and just it's really beautiful. we're just waiting for the false nails.
I do always really love his prints as well. I think his prints are
Yeah. And I think it was interesting what you were saying, Lucy, about the palette, because I think we're seeing at number 24, actually, that's quite an unusual mix of colours there, kind of a brown and this really striking.
And it's not consistent with, you know, all the other designers.
No,
in
it's
terms
not
of, like,
at
this
all.
is really distinct. It doesn't feel like it's following, it's kind of leading with its...
There's an earthiness to it, definitely, as well, which I always like with his work. It goes back to, I guess, the tangent flows and varying clothes, but they always feel like they've come out of somewhere more than just a fashion studio. There's something of them being sort of lost in time and rediscovered, and maybe that's the thing with the nails. Is this
Are these
idea
all
of-
nails then as
Yeah,
well?
starting at number 29.
Okay.
So not 28?
I don't think number 28. I think it's more swatches of sort of fabric.
I think he's a designer who, for many years, hasn't been afraid to continue to explore motifs and ideas from season to season to season. He's really rejected the feeling that you have to be new every time.
Completely.
Yeah, and I remember you said, didn't he quote saying when he starts a collection, he always looks at whether he wants to respond to the previous collections, and he's done that really fearlessly for decades.
And he'll often do that for a few seasons, where he'll build on an idea, and he talks about it being like a big pot of sort of curry or stew, and you add ingredients, and then it changes each season, and that's how it goes for sort of 4 or 5 seasons. Then maybe a new concept comes along. So what do we see in this? And I'm going to put you on the spot here, Dal, but obviously you've been going through his incredible archive while you've been doing Archivist. What are the kind of consistent ideas that you see coming through in this? You know, we talked a bit about what's disposable, what's not, that kind of thing, but what else is coming through?
I think, you know, the colour palette, as you said, you know, there's a real continuity there. I think this idea of, you know, taking one type of fabric or one material and using it, changing just one little thing. So the earlier part of the collection where there's sort of a twist in the pattern there, I think that's something that he does quite a lot. And also what you're talking about with the demi-couture, so it's the same fabric but treated differently, layered one over the other. There's a lot of that. And also, you know, we haven't really mentioned the name change of the brand. You know, it's not Hussein Chalayan anymore, it's Chalayan.
Okay.
And that, along with a collection like this, doesn't have any of the theatrics. It feels very much it's a conscious kind of move into a new direction. So I think, yeah, from looking at his archive and the way the archive has been shot, with that view to making it look wearable, I think this is very much the direction that it's always been in, but it's now being kind of presented in a clearer way, I think, for people to understand.
You're so right, because even in recent shows, he's always had projections behind him of...
Yeah, well, spring,
here
summer,
it's
you know,
very
there was
clean.
the bathing suit, I think, under a dress or with the towel. There's that. Well, there's something that brilliantly you have to watch it move. It doesn't really work in pictures, but I think, as far as I can tell, I don't know whether anyone's saying that was at the show on Twitter.
No, there wasn't theatrics in the show
anything
at all.
happens. What was the music? Do we know?
Yeah, I think no, I don't have the music. Do you guys know what the music was? No. I think it's interesting what you were saying about the name change, and I do want to talk about that a little bit, because that's obviously a very commercial decision to move from being Hussein Chalayan to just being Chalayan. It's about being sort of punchy in store. And do you think that's coming through? Does this feel like a slightly more sort of, I hate to say commercial, but it feels slightly more like this is about this going from catwalk to shop to wearer. Do you think that that's what he's going to be focusing on now? Would you like to see him focus on that in a way? Do you feel like he's proved himself as the great mind and now it's time to just sell some clothes?
I mean, I would say that the kind of, if you think about when he left college in the 90s, you know, and throughout the last decade, there was much more division between the fashion world and the art world and the film world, and if you did make a statements like he did, they had real impact, and they felt original, and they didn't feel kind of rehearsed or, you know, conceited in any way, whereas now those boundaries are very much dissolved, and so it actually isn't so powerful anymore to kind of, you know, put together some kind of huge theatrical presentation, because it's actually really quite common now, as we were saying before, that Hussein kind of led the way in that, and so maybe, you know, it's actually more appropriate now to to just focus on the clothes or to kind of, you know, I don't know, do you agree?
Yeah,
What do
there's
you
almost
think?
a newness in that, isn't there?
Well, I kind of think, like, I'd like him to be fully recognised for what he's brought to our culture and our fashion, but I don't know what form I want that recognition to be, because I don't think the only form of valid recognition is sales and money and commercial success. I mean, maybe it's just that the people who care and know what he's done. You know, it is a commercial. I think also this does seem a more commercial collection, but do I want him to go that way? Do I want him to completely lose everything that's made him who he is, or have to pretend it's not as valid? I don't know. I don't know. I really don't know.
But also maybe he, you know, the fact that he had the show at the Listen Gallery, I mean, maybe he's actually separating out his two practices instead of trying to keep it all together. Maybe he's viewing it, I can be an artist here and then I can be a designer here, and they don't always have to try and work together. You know, I don't mean, I'm speaking for him, no idea, but
no, I think that's an interesting point to be able to, because it goes back to this idea of
it's the fact he showed in a proper gallery and everything. You know, and it was a.
He's of all the fashion designers, he's the most recognised in the art world, isn't he? And I remember in the last panel, Colin said maybe he should divide his practices. And when I first heard that, I thought, no, I don't want him to divide his practices. But now, maybe it would be good for him to do that, so he could focus more purely on the art and potentially fashion within that art. His not only, I didn't see the Listen Gallery one, but I saw the footage of the Design Museum one. It was a phenomenally powerful presentation.
Completely.
Just even the use of the mannequins, you know, because they weren't conventionally beautiful by any means. They looked quite pained and fleshy, and you know, he is a man who thinks way beyond a top and a skirt, way beyond a top and a skirt.
And there's a certain irony to the fact that as so many other designers are sort of uniting the art and fashion world in very simplistic ways, getting an artist to do a print for a t-shirt or a print for a bag, you know, and everyone's talking about art and fashion coming together, to see him, someone who, as we've all said, has explored art in such a sort of authentic and intelligent way, now sort of perhaps splitting the practices a little bit more. It feels he's always going against the current, isn't he?
I think what I'd like to see is a kind of dedicated Hussein Chalayan space, and that doesn't necessarily have to be a shop, but I think what would really benefit all of us, and maybe him as a brand, is to have a space that people can walk into and understand immediately, because I think that's another issue, is that when his collections are in other stores, they are presented amongst other things. And I think these sorts of clothes that have come from that inspiration, have come from that brain, should be presented in exactly the way as he wants to see them. And that's kind of the area, that's how I could see, if it goes forward, that's what I would want to see. I'd want to see a shop, or I'd want to see a space, a gallery, whatever name
Can
you
you
want to give
imagine
it.
how exciting that would
Exactly.
be? You know, I mean, it would have live music and his films in it, and it would have his art presentation, aeroplane wings. You know, it'd be incredible.
Because I think I think it's only through conversation and almost recommendation that a younger generation gets to hear about Hussein's work. It's only if you as a tutor and educator say or tell someone to go and look at this collection, they would never, ever, 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 ever have heard or hear of him otherwise. And in a way, being romantic about it, that's wonderful, because it almost seems like a sort of you're imparting this knowledge onto someone. But, you know, on another level, why is that happening? You know, why are they walking into liberties and walking straight past the rail of his clothes? So you've got to, and there should be a balance of the two. And I think him having his own space that people could walk into or experience, which involves film and has a gallery of all of his things that he's ever done before, you know, has a BFI screening room. Even, you know, you can imagine, we can all imagine it, what it would be like. It would be elements of all of our own experiences of him as an artist, and I think that's what he deserves.
We forget, actually, because he's been working for so long, we forget how young he is. He's actually only sort of early 40s.
Yeah, he's
you know, I mean, admittedly he's not Gareth Pugh 30, but he's young. You know, we've still got fully 20 years to see what he's going to give us and how he progresses and transforms.
We're optimistic for him.
But it's funny though, isn't it, that he hasn't got a shop already?
It
You know,
is
there are
crazy
so many of
to
those
think
other
about it.
designers, these newer or more recent designers that are very quick to kind of open shops and talk about themselves as brands rather than just being artists or creatives. And he's very much of that older guard, let's say, and his contemporaries, you know, Lee McQueen, John Galliano, are not working in the same way anymore, and he is, but has still sort of managed to sort of remain back a bit.
Because it should feel like a privilege to wear his clothes, shouldn't it? It should feel like, to think of the mind that went behind them, it should feel like that. But
that's exactly what I just want to go out and buy something now.
Yeah,
mind you, I want to do that quite a lot.
But I think the collection is beautiful.
Beautiful, yeah. I think that's a really nice note to end on. Let's all just go and buy some Hussein and put our money where our mouth is.
Exactly.
And go on eBay and buy the fragrance.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for joining me. What a wonderful conversation and what a wonderful collection. It was absolutely beautiful. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.